You know, prayer is an important discipline for the spiritual person, more so for the spiritual leader. But it's important to know when to pray and when not to pray, especially as a law enforcement chaplain. Knowing when not to pray is just as essential as knowing when to pray. Chaplain Dan Pabon explores this topic, and he's going to share important principles that you as a law enforcement chaplain can use to guide your interactions. Prayer is always appropriate, but maybe not verbally.
Greetings, folks. Many of us, I'm sure everybody who study either in North America or England, remember the phrase that goes, to be or not to be. Who wrote that? Shakespeare, you know. However, this segment is entitled, To Pray or Not to Pray. Now, as police officers or police chaplains, actually your title will be law enforcement chaplain. You're not a police officer. You're a law enforcement chaplain. You've been sworn to it. You have gone through academy. They're giving you a test. In fact, when they did my polygraph test, the man who was doing the polygraph, he said, "You're a pastor, huh?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I am." "What church?" Told him the name of my church. "Do you have a church right now?" Well, I told him almost my whole story in the ministry. Then he asked me, "Let me ask you something." He asked me, "Is the police officer job in the Bible?" And I said, "Yes, sir, it is. It's referred to." Oh, he went to his desk. He opened the drawer. He pulls out a Bible. He says, "Here," he gave me the Bible. "Show me." I don't know if that was part of my test. Of course, I look in the book of Romans, chapter 13, which says, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God." Many versions says, members of the law. I said, "That's good. Very good, Pastor," he said to me. And then again, we had a conversation. I took my test. But they asked you all kinds of questions and so on. And finally, the test is done. I pass. But once in a while, when I go back to the station, I see the polygrapher. And he goes, "Hey, Pastor, how you doing?" I said, "Doing okay. Doing okay. Are you studying your Bible?" And I said, "Of course, I have to do it daily." But then again comes the moment when you are asked, or the sergeant assign you a police officer so you can ride along with him or her. In another segment, I explained the fact that the moment you go into the car, the first thing the police officer will ask you is, "Why do you become a pastor?" And that's an opportunity right there. See, the moment you get into that car, you have to remember that that's a government car. You will not initiate a religious conversation. You let the officer ask. You would not ask the officer, "Can I pray with you?" Can't do that. It's a government car and so on. Now, you don't want to be accused later of trying to push religion into the officer. But most of the time, and this is where silent prayer, where you ride along with the officer. And this is a prayer that perhaps I repeated almost every time that I rode along in the police car, particularly on a Saturday night. I said, "Lord, give me the right words at the right moment. I'm here with this officer for the next 4 or 5 hours, whatever time he allows, or whatever time you have. Lord, give me the right words, the right answer, and help me to be quiet when I have to be quiet." And one of the verses that I do quote to the officers when I patrol with them is, "To everything there's a season and a time for every purpose under the heaven." Ecclesiastes 3. But then in verse 7, there's a part that says, "A time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak." A time to keep silence and a time to speak. Yeah, they trust you. You have a badge. You're their chaplain. They call you by the name chaplain. It's interesting because sometimes when they're on the radio or they're on the phone talking to another officer, and because their language sometimes can be so crude, the word comes out, And they realize that the chaplain is sitting, they go, oh, I'm sorry, chaplain, I'm sorry, sir, you know. And that's why I just smile, you know, because that's the way they work. They're used to it. But it's not the time for me to object or say, no, don't do it again. That's not my job. One of the things that I've been allowed to do when I speak to officers when they just finish academy, this would happen every 3 months when the new group of officers would come to the station with their spouses and so on. And the chaplain is given like 20 minutes to tell them who you are so they know who you are, to tell them what you do, and to tell them what they can expect from me as a police chaplain. First of all, I'm a minister of the gospel. I'm a member of the clergy. They don't need to know what religion I belong to, though I tell them when they ask me. And then once you're riding along, the silent prayer comes, and Lord, give me the right words at the right moment. I don't want to say the wrong thing. One thing is this, many officers will ask you, chaplain, can you pray? I say, sure. Now remember, I didn't ask the question. They asked me. And if they ask the question, can we pray, then it's their duty, the ball is on their court. And sometimes, sure, if you can stop for 10 seconds in a 7-Eleven or something, we can have prayer. And they do. And we stop. I said, Lord, thank you for the privilege of riding with Officer Rodriguez or Perez or Johnson, and send your holy angels to protect us on this ride along tonight. For we ask in your precious name, amen. They appreciate that. Many officers, and I tell you what, this is true, I'm not making this up. Many officers believe that because they have the chaplain riding along, nothing bad is going to happen to them. Nothing. We know better than that. And I feel good about it because they feel, and I said, Lord, thank you, because this guy really, I hear them talking on the phone with their wife. Hi, honey, I have the chaplain with me, so you know I'm coming back home tonight. And I said, thank you, Lord. Thank you for that opportunity to pray or not to pray, to say something or when not to say something. Now, we stopped a lady once, and this officer is one of the funniest officers I ever rode along with. I will not mention his name, though we're still good friends. We write to each other. He's working for an airline as a security person there after his retirement. And we stopped this lady who just passed the red light in front of us and then make a left turn illegal. So she had 2 charges right there. The blue lights go on. And this is when the chaplain, it's time to pray silently. I said, Lord, give me wisdom in this stop we're going to make. When they stop the person, usually you carry your flashlight. The officer gets out of the car. They allow you to get out of the patrol car. And you stay behind because the officer is going to the car, knock the window of the lady, and the chaplain is in the back corner. I could hear her screaming, upset because the police officer stopped her. I'm in the corner of her car in the back, listening carefully. The officer is talking to her. Then she said something like, why did you stop me? Why did you stop me? What do I do? And the officer explained kindly, you turn on the red light and you're not supposed to make that left turn. It's only U-turn. And then she really got upset and she says, you know, look at that. Just look at all those people. They all, right now, look at that. They're speeding out there and you stop me. Now, the reason I pray silently because the person behind the wheel is pretty upset. I want the Lord, you know, to place, you know, His Spirit there so that person. But then she said to him, look at this. You stopped me. I pay for your salary. And she kept repeating that she paid for the officer's salary, which is true, of course. So, you know, tax money. Then the officer answered, ma'am, you don't know how happy I am that I found you tonight. She looked at him funny. Ma'am, you pay my salary, I know. By the way, ma'am, I've been trying to get a raise for the last 3 months. And here you are. I'm so glad I met you. The lady got so upset. She got the ticket. She signed it. In fact, when she signed the ticket, she just threw the pencil away, But anyway, about 2 hours later, the sergeant calls, so-and-so, you have the chaplain, right? Yes, sir. You guys come to the station? Yes, sir. We'll be there. Now, my number, because the chaplain becomes part of the command staff, is the chief of police, the sub-chief, the captains, and so on. The chaplain is part of that group. That's why the uniform of the chaplains is all yellow, the things here, and but and the badge is also yellow because you're part of the command staff. But when the sergeant called, we went to the station. The police officer told me, Chaplain, you know what that is, right? That call? That's that lady we stopped. I bet you she called the station and she's upset that she complained that we did something. Then the police officer asked me, Chaplain, was I disrespectful? And I said, no. Did I curse at her? And I said, no, you did not. You were a little sarcastic, but that's only between you and I. I wasn't saying that. He was sarcastic. When we got to the station, the sergeant is really looking at us, smiling, and he said, what do you guys do? And the police officer said, Chaplain is here as my witness. I was disrespectful? I said, no. Did I curse at her? I said, no, I did not. Then the sergeant says, get out of here. The lady called, and the sergeant told the lady, I'm going to talk to him or to them. And that was it. He did it, went back. But that police officer knows that every time we stop somebody, I was praying back there in the car or outside in the other corner. Now, one of the officers that I rode, big, tall guy, he applied for the Secret Service. The academy is in Beltsville, Maryland. And when he applied to be a member of the Secret Service, it's a process that takes about a year to investigate your life back and forth. Perhaps I was the only other person besides his wife that he told. He said, I'd like to join the Secret Service. Nobody else knew, and he told me. And he knew that whatever happened in that car, it stays there. He said, Chaplain, would you pray for me? And I said, sure. Let's find a parking lot somewhere, 7-Eleven. I said, sure, and they usually do. I pray, Lord, this officer's desire. He wants to join the Secret Service. It's going to be a process. But if you, in your plans for him and his wife, in your plans for them, he's going to be part of the Secret Service, let it happen, Lord. It's up to you. It's in your hands. We ask in Jesus' precious name. Amen. That officer, 1 month goes by, 2 months go by, 5 months go by. We patrol again together. He says, Chaplain, can you pray a little harder? I haven't heard from the Secret Service. And I said, I wish I could use prayer to grant your desire, but it's up to the Lord. You see, in the book of Jeremiah, and it's good to know these verses because though they don't have a Bible, nowadays you can have it on your phone and you can read it straight. But the book of Jeremiah says that before you were in your mother's womb, I knew you. I knew your name. And they said, really? Yes, it's right in the Bible. So he already knew what you were going to be doing now. He already knew you were going to be a police officer. And now you want to go into the Secret Service, which is a very, very powerful entity. Well, about 10 months later, he heard from them. He was accepted. By then, I've been transferred from Orlando to Tacoma Park, this area. And he knew because he called me once in a while and we'd pray on the phone. When he was admitted, he made it. One final test. He was at the academy here in Beltsville, Maryland. One more test, which is the shooting range. And it had to be perfect, almost perfect. Only 1 point out of 100. If you pass with, you won't pass with 98. It had to be at least 99. It was a Sunday. He said, Chaplain, can we go out eat? I was already in this area. The academy is nearby. We went out to eat together. We talked about it. He said, Chaplain, I've been praying. I said, good. You can pray the same source I pray. But again, tomorrow, you have one final exam that you need to pass. I know, Chaplain, I'm nervous. I told him what to do. Go to bed early. Don't drink any caffeine tonight. Try to rest well. In the morning, talk to the Lord and let him know, Lord, here I am. That could be a giant for you, like David had Goliath. Well, this is a giant, but tomorrow you're going to go in the name of the God of heavens, as David did when he slew the giant. Well, 2 days went by, 3 days, and I said, man, I wonder if he passed. I was afraid to ask him. He would have perhaps texted me then, or maybe the phone call came. He said, Chaplain. Now, when he speaks that way, I know that was good news. Otherwise, he say, hey, Chaplain. You know, he said, Chaplain. I said, yes, sir. Guess what? Oh, I know. How do you know? Well, you listen to what you're talking. You know, chaplains, we need to listen carefully because, you know, I passed. I'm a member of the United States Secret Service. Congratulations, son. Congratulations. And then he said this, thanks for your prayers, Chaplain. Thank you. And I want you to be at the graduation when I take my diploma later on. And I said, I'll be glad to. I'll be honored. The day came. They needed my information from Social Security to driver's license. They need to check my background. I was going to go into the U.S. Secret Service Academy grounds. And it's interesting because once you get to the gate, they know exactly who you are, what kind of car you're driving, and so on. I was going to my friend's graduation, who was a cop and become a U.S. Secret Service. He was pretty tall, so that's the first qualification he had. Notice that I never, ever asked to pray. He always asked me. Happens in the car, happens anywhere, but you're there to serve the community in a government car. Now, one more thing before we finish, because I want to read something to you before we finish. The greatest fear of every cop, every day when he leaves his house, is to know the fear that they might not come back home. And there's a prayer that is, you can get it in the internet, it's called the police officer's prayer. It goes this way: O Almighty God, whose great power and eternal wisdom embrace the universe, watch over all law enforcement officers. Protect them from harm in the performance of their duty to stop crime, robberies, riots, and violence. We pray to help them keep our streets and homes safe day and night. We recommend them to your care because their duty is dangerous. Grant them your unending strength and encourage in their daily assignments. Dear God, protect these brave officers. Grant them your almighty protection. Unite them safely with their families after duty ends. Amen. To pray or not to pray, yeah. I will pray all the time silently when I'm in the car. I will pray before I speak to the chief of police congregation down in Florida. I pray for myself before I get the opening prayer. And if they ask me about my religion, I gladly share that. If they ask about my doctrine, I gladly share that. But I share the most, what I really cherish the most, is when I can tell them, Jesus is returning soon. And the kingdom is real. It's a fact. It's in this book. And I tell you, those officers will never, ever forget you because you prayed with them at the right moment. My friend continues in the Secret Service. I see him once in a while protecting our president. But I tell you, if you become a police chaplain, remember that. To pray or not to pray at the right time, loudly, yes. God bless you.
The next presentation is on compassion fatigue and that it is real. It can be overwhelming. Chaplain Roy Gaton discusses how to avoid falling victim to this in taking care of ourselves as we take care of others.
Welcome to the second part of our presentation on compassion fatigue, taking care of ourselves while we take care of others. In this second part, we are going to be focusing on the part of taking care of others. The first part was about taking care of ourselves. And so now as we come to the part where now we look at our responsibility that God has given us to take care of others in the context of our call. I have to tell you this, but in my call to ministry, as I remember a long time ago when God called me to ministry, I remember that my calling was twofold. Of course, the first part of my calling was about preaching the gospel of salvation, that eternal life. But I also remember that while preach the gospel of salvation, that eternal life, only if necessary, use words. Because I remember that the second part of my call was that while this world will never be perfect until Christ comes to take us home, we do have a responsibility to try to make this world a better world. Try to make our community a better community. It is also in that context that I also received my calling to be a police chaplain. Now, as we come into that part of how to be able to take care of others and our responsibility, I am reminded of one day when Jesus came into the town of Capernaum. We find the story on Mark chapter 2. And in that story, we find Jesus. Now, this is before Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. Yet, Jesus was a celebrity in his days. And Jesus, everywhere he went, Jesus was followed by great multitude. And the Bible says that when Jesus came into Capernaum, everybody followed him. And when Jesus went into this particular house, the house right away became full of people. In fact, there were people that were jumping out the windows and the doors were blocked. I don't know if the fire marshal was going to come, but I'm sure that if the fire marshal was there, he was going to start asking people to come out. And the Bible says that in the midst of all of this, there were 4 friends that were there with a paralytic. And now while the story oftentimes found in the book of Mark chapter 2 emphasize the paralytic, I want to today emphasize the 4 friends of this man. You see, these 4 young men, they loved their friend that was paralytic. And more than anything, they wanted to take him to Jesus because they knew that Jesus could heal him. Now, I want to share 3 things from these 4 men. Number 1, these 4 men loved their friend. If you remember the first part of my presentation, we talked about the essence of who we are is love. Who we are, the context of who we are made in the image of our God and Creator, and part of that is being created in love. And so these 4 men, they loved their friend. And just as they loved their friend, we are also as ministers, we also love people. I am here because I love people. You are there because you love people. As police chaplains, you love people. We do what we do because we love people. For these 4 men, it wasn't just enough to point their friend to Jesus. Could you imagine if these 4 friends, they're like there and they see their friend, which they love, by the way, their paralytic friend, and they're over there and they see that Jesus is in that house. Now, they look at their friend and they look at the house and they tell their friend, you know what? Over there, you see that house over there? There's a man and his name is Jesus. He could heal you. So why don't you go to that house and there's a man there and Jesus could heal you. It wasn't enough for these 4 friends to point their paralytic friend to Jesus. They took their friend to Jesus. And just the same for us. It's not enough just to point people to Jesus. We have a responsibility to take people to Jesus. How often do we see ourselves as people who just preach and preach and preach? Preaching is not enough. We have a responsibility to those that are less fortunate. We have a responsibility to those that are in need. We have a responsibility to take people to Jesus. We have a responsibility to this world, to this society. We have a responsibility to those that are less fortunate. And number 3, sometimes we need to be creative. Sometimes we just have to be creative. Sometimes if we look at what appears to be, sometimes it just could be impossible. And we just got to be creative. For these 4 men, they see their friend here, and they look at the house, and they see that the house is full of people. I mean, they look at the windows, people are coming out the windows. They look at the door, the doors are blocked. I mean, how could they take their friend to see Jesus? And they look at their friend, and they look at the house, and they look at their friend, and they look at their house, and how can they take their friend? So as they study the situation, they come up with the idea, let's go through the roof. Let's make a hole in that roof. And let's take our friend up to the roof. And after making a hole, let's bring him down. Now, I don't know. Maybe they knew the owner. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they had to pay a whole lot of money to the owner after they took their friend up the roof. But they were creative. And not only were they creative, but they had to break barriers. And so they took their friend up the roof, they made a hole, and they brought him down to where Jesus was. And Jesus healed their friend. How often for us might be the same way. How often for us, especially now, we're in the midst, our nation, our world is in the midst of this pandemic. And in ministry right now, as police chaplain, how can we be creative in our ministry to those police officers, many of them that are right now suffering, and they're in the midst of uncertainty and fear and anxiety? Not just because of the pandemic, but everything that is going on around them. The uncertainty of our world, our society. How can we minister to them? How can we bring peace of mind in the midst of uncertainty? How can we be creative? How can sometimes, as we find ourselves oftentimes in impossible situations, how can we sometimes see ourselves breaking barriers in ministry? Whether it's church ministry, whether it's hospital ministry, whether it's police ministry, whether it's military ministry, whatever type of ministry. Sometimes we do need to break barriers. So today I want to share with you several principles, essential principles that I believe will be able to help you in your ministry as police chaplain. Number 1, be present. It is important to be present. Your mere presence is important. Your mere presence is already a ministry that you are given. It is already a benefit. It is already a blessing that you are providing to those police officers. Being present with them, you already carry within yourself a ministry of love, of care, of healing that you are providing to those officers. But it's also important to recognize that in the ministry of presence, there is also an important factor that you need to keep in mind. It is important to recognize that there is a difference between, for example, church pastoring and police chaplaincy. In church pastoring, there is already an expectation of you as a pastor. In church ministry, for example, people already have certain expectations. I mean, they come to you, right? They already know that they need to come to you for preaching. They already know that they need to come to you for devotional. They already know that they need to come to you for church board meetings. They already need to come to you for many things that are part of the ministry that you provide. However, in police chaplaincy, you need to be proactive. You need to be proactive when it comes to the ministry that you provide to the officers. I remember that when I was a police chaplain, my ministry was proactive for them. They needed to get to know me. They were not going to come to me for counsel. They were not going to come to me for any type of advice or for me to listen to them if they did not trust me. And they were not going to trust me if they did not know who I was. So I needed to be proactive in getting to know them in order for them to be able to get to know me and in order for them then to be able to trust me. So I remember that I started going on ride-alongs with them. I remember that I was there in the briefing room with them. I was there in their lounge with them. I got to know them very well and intimately. Every opportunity that I had, I got to know them. And so that way, as I got to know them, then they were able to get to know me, and they were able to trust me, and then they were able to come to me later when they needed to. So again, you have to be proactive with them in your ministry of presence. It is also important for you to recognize that in the ministry of presence, you need to also be comfortable in your presence. You need to be comfortable in who you are. Many times, police officers, they don't like to talk. Many times, they just do not like to share, especially if they don't know you yet. And so you need to be comfortable in your presence and also comfortable in silence. However, many times, many of us are not comfortable with silence. How often do you find people, that are not just comfortable in silence at all? And they're like, and they want to say something. You see, many of us are caregivers, right? Many of us are here because we love people and we want to be there for them and we want to fix the situation. And so there is this anxiety for us to talk. There is this anxiety for us to share. We are uncomfortable with silence. How many times I, as a pastor, have found myself in situations, and not just with pastors, but I see this with social workers. I see this even with doctors. I see this, with other people, psychologists, that are uncomfortable with silence. And sometimes, while meaning well, they are saying things that are counterproductive. And so we need to be very careful as well. We need to be comfortable with silence as well. But remember the importance of that ministry of presence. Number two, as we are comfortable in the ministry of presence, we also need to learn how to listen. Now, today I want to share with you 5 levels of listening. And these are very important because we need to know them. Because each level is different. And each level, it's closer and closer to the ideal level of listening. Number 1 is hearing but not listening. There's a difference between hearing and listening. The difference is in the concept of attention, by the way. And so you can hear noises. I remember when I was in Southern California and when I was in South Florida, I learned how to listen to the radio. Not so much because I liked the radio, what they were saying, but sometimes I would just turn the radio because I had a long commute. And I would turn the radio just to have some noise. I will turn the radio just to have some noise. And so there is a difference between hearing and listening. Elderly people, oftentimes they turn on the television, especially if they live alone. They turn on the television not because they want to hear what others are saying, but they just want to hear that there is someone in the room. They just want to hear people talking. Number two, it's kind of like listening in parts, tuning in and out. Number two, tuning in and out, listening in parts. For example, I can be listening to someone, and remember, I love people, I care about people, I care about this person, I'm listening to them 100%, and they're talking to me, and I'm listening to them, and all of a sudden, as I listen to them, I'm like, I haven't had dinner yet, what am I going to have for dinner? And then I come back, and I'm listening to them, and then my mind drifts again, and I have another meeting after this, and then I start thinking about the other meeting, and then I come back to them, and you see where I'm going with this, right? And at the end of the conversation, I have tuned it and out, but more or less I have listened to 50, 60% of what they were saying, and I can more or less make up what the message is. But the question is, have I listened to them completely? And the answer is no. And by the way, maybe I have missed something important that they have said. By the way, for example, and I know in some cultures, for example in the Hispanic culture, oftentimes people are used to, they share with you like a whole story for 1 hour just to make one point. And so maybe you have missed that point. And so again, that's level number 2. Number 3, competitive or combative listening happens when we are more interested, now listen to this, we are more interested in promoting our own point of view than in understanding or exploring someone else's view. We are either listening for openings to take the floor or for flaws or weak points we can attack. As we pretend to pay attention, we are impatiently waiting for an opening or internally formulating our rebuttal and planning our devastating comeback that will destroy their argument or make us the victor. Again, combative or competitive point. Again, sometimes it happens that here we are pretending to listen, but here we are thinking how we are going to respond. How are we going to say something better? Or make a better argument? Or how are we going to make our own point? By the way, I wanted to share this because sometimes it happens to many of us. I don't know if some of you have ever gone through this, but sometimes it's like here you are thinking of how you are going to respond to other people when they are talking to you. Or even more, sometimes it's like you already know the answer to what they're saying, so it's like you already know how you are going to respond to them or answer their question before they are finished telling you what the question is. Number 4, in passive or attentive listening, we are genuinely interested in hearing and understanding the other person's point of view. We are attentive and passively listening. We assume that we've heard and understand correctly, but stay passive and do not verify it. In other words, it's like we're listening, but the reality is that we are assuming. And so we are assuming and we are not sure. And so what is going on is that we are not either asking any questions, we are not doing any type of reflective listening, we are not doing any type of reflective content, we are not asking anything that we do not know or are confirming what it is that they're saying. And finally, number 5, it is active listening. Active listening is when we put everything aside, when we put all thoughts aside and we concentrate 100% to the person that is in front of us. We concentrate to what they're saying. And not only are we listening to the words, which, by the way, it's only 17% of communication. All the words that they're saying, only 17% is part of communication. The rest is the effect of the person, the mannerism, the tone of voice, the volume of their voice, the eye contact, the body language. And you will see, my friends, that marvelous things will start to happen. And not only are you going to be able to listen and to understand, but you will also be able to read between the lines. I have been in situations, for example, and I know that as a police chaplain, I have been there not just for the police officers and their families, but I have also been there for the victims, especially those victims of abuse and domestic violence. And I have been in situations where I have been able to listen as they speak and be able to minister to their needs. Not just as they were speaking and talking, but also to be able to see their mannerism, their body language, to be able to see their affect, to be able to listen actively to what they were saying. So it is important to recognize what active listening is all about. Number three, assist and help others identify feelings and emotions. Assist and help others in identifying feelings and emotions. There is an essential need to help others identify feelings and emotions. There are times in which people do not know how to express feelings and emotions. And I'm not just talking about men, because the reality is that it is not that we are that much difference between men and women, but there is also a reality that for whatever reason, over centuries and generations and cultures, we have been, as men, many times conditioned. Again, notice the word conditioned to what? Men don't share their feelings. Men that share their feelings, they show vulnerability. Men are strong. Men don't cry. And also, there are cultures as well, and there are situations, families in which there are women that also don't express feelings. You have these women, for example, that are matriarchs, Hispanic culture, in Hawaii, while working in Hawaii as well, where there are matriarchs that they are there for their families, and, they want to be strong for their families. And it is important for them not to show emotions and not to show vulnerability. And so we need to be aware, and sometimes we need to give permission. It is important to assist them and to help them show emotions. I want to stretch this a little bit more, because even in the context of police chaplaincy, it is important that as we counsel oftentimes officers, and as we counsel family members, and as we are working with family members, or even sometimes abused people or victims of domestic violence, it is important that we recognize that we need to help people in expressing their emotions. There are three things that could take place if people do not express their emotions freely and naturally and in healthy ways. Number one, if you take things in, and this happens, by the way, many times to police officers, if you keep your emotions in, and you keep your emotions in, and sometimes people even take pride in taking emotions in and not expressing it and taking it in and taking it in, what's going to happen? As you keep everything in, what's going to happen? It will grow, it will increase until one day, what's going to happen? Explode, right? And sometimes it's not going to explode with those people that caused all that emotion to still in there. It's going to explode with those people that are closest to you. Your spouse, your children, your loved ones, those people that are the most vulnerable as well. And so you need to be aware of that. That emotion needs to come out. Number two, it is important also to recognize that many times those emotions, as they come in, they try to be sedated by many. They try to be sedated with what? They try to be put to sleep with what? Oftentimes with drugs, alcohol, different types of pornography, by the way, different types of addictions. By the way, I'll share this with you. And this is not part of this presentation per se, but I want to share this with you because as we are caregivers, as we are counselors, as we are chaplains, we need to help others that are going through this. But do you know that every one of us, listen to this, every one of us is addicted to something. Every one of us is addicted to something. And so we need to be aware of that because addictions can be destructive. And so we need to help people that are dealing with addictions. And addictions can be, again, as I said, drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, television, video games. I mean, the list can go on and on and on. And so we need to be aware of this because one way that we are going to be helping those officers that are keeping these emotions inside or that are going to be dealing with many of these things inside, whether it's anger, whether it's frustration, they are going to be addicted to something, and many of those addictions are indeed dangerous and destructive. And so we are going to be helping people that are dealing with addictions. And many of these addictions are used to try to sedate people, try to put those emotions to sleep. And the third one is that emotional rope that all of us have, especially with those that are closest to us. Right? That emotional rope, oftentimes when that emotional rope it's strained, sometimes it can break. And so we need to be aware that that emotional rope, doesn't strain too much that it breaks. And sometimes it can break from the team, it can break from fellow officers, it can break from superiors, it can even break from family members and spouse. And so we need to be aware that, as emotions come in, I'll give you an example, of in couples. How many times have you, seen couples that, at first they love each other, right? And they have influence over one another, but as these emotions are strong at first, if one person is fighting all the time or nagging all the time, then you start hearing the other person says, you know what? It leaves one ear, it comes out the other. And then as that emotional string strains, it'd be like using terminology that are common, and we oftentimes hear like words like whatever. Have you heard that? It's like, oh, whatever. Do whatever you want. Or whatever, and that is that being strained to the point that oftentimes as it breaks, it just kind of breaks that emotions. And so again, we need to help people deal in expressing their feelings and their emotions. Number 4, allow people and give permission for people to express their feelings and emotions. Oftentimes as you are there, allow them, give them permission to cry, give them permission to express their feelings and their emotions. I remember I was in a situation in which a police officer was killed on the line of duty. And as I was there, with the family, other families started coming in. And I remember the father of this officer, he just went, and as he was coming in, he goes, I hate God. And he knew that I was a chaplain. He goes, I hate God. As he looked at me, he goes, I hate God. And he was kind of expecting for me either to get angry or for me to respond in a negative way. I did not. I said, it's okay. It's okay. Allow people to freely express their feelings and their emotions. It's okay. Be careful in giving advice on how a person should or should not feel. You know, one of my first experiences, and I always share this now as a learning experience, but I was there after an automobile accident that took place in a 2-lane highway, and I was there when the doctors came in, and they told the wife that the husband didn't make it, and I remember as if it was yesterday. This was like 26 years ago, 27 years ago. And I remember it just came out like that. And again, I tried to take the words back in, but it was already too late. But now I use this as an example of what not to do, as a learning example. And I remember I was there with her, and as if it was yesterday, I said to her, I know how you feel. And how dare I said I, because I didn't. And I remember that lady kind of looked at me, and she almost wanted to eat me alive, but because how dare I said something like that. You know, I had no idea how she felt. And even if others, or even if you have gone through similar experience, none of us know exactly how the other person feels. Number 5, we are students and teachers of each other. We are indeed students and teachers of each other. So every time that we connect with one another, we learn from one another. Antoine Boyson in the 1920s, the father of the modern chaplaincy movement, talked about this in the form of the concept of the human living document. The concept of the human living document teaches us that each and every one of us is an open, living human document. That means that every time that we come into contact with one another, we learn from one another. As I shared with you before, I lived in Hawaii for 5 years. And in Hawaii, there's a word that most of us know, and that is the word aloha. What we don't know oftentimes is that the word aloha comes from 2 separate words. The word alo, which means connections, human connections, and the word ha, which means spirit. And so the word aloha indeed means connection of the human spirit. And so in the old days, old Hawaiians, whenever they greeted each other, they actually hugged one another and they actually breathed one another. So they, meaning inhaled one another. And I love that because it talks about that human connection where we are able then to not only connect with one another, but we are able to breathe one another. We are able to breathe each other's spirits. And so the concept of the human living document teaches us that we learn from one another. That every time that we connect, that there is a learning experience. So as a pastor, as a police chaplain, I have learned so much from the experience of others. I remember I became a police chaplain at a very young age. I was actually 26 years old. And I remember that it helped me to be able to learn from the experience of others to the point that there were so many things that I learned that allowed me not to take important things for granted, like love, life, health, my family. And those things I have carried with me all the way until today. Many of those things that I have learned from others have been important lessons from me. Experiencing the bravery of people who struggled from mere survival. Learn how people deal many times with tragedy, with illness, with death and grief. Learn to take important things in value, and also at the same time learn not to take important things for granted. So again, we are students and teachers to each other. Number 6, we can always perceive ourselves and others as either extending love or giving a call for help. There's an old movie that was called Patch Adams by Robin Williams. And I don't know how many of you have seen it, but in that movie, Robin Williams was a resident, a physician, a resident. And there was a particular patient in that movie in one of the medical units that nobody wanted to see because he was already categorized as a difficult patient. And none of the doctors, none of the nurses, none of the staff wanted to go in. And he actually went in. And as he became familiar with the patient and as he started building a relationship with his patient, of course he found out that this patient had issues and this patient had a lot of fears and a lot of frustrations and there was a lot of uncertainty in the life and the prognosis of this patient. And this is what came to mind as an example of this. We can always perceive ourselves and others as either extending love or giving a call for help. Oftentimes, difficult people that we encounter are people that are actually calling for help. Many times, those people that are the most difficult are the people that are struggling with the greatest issues, the greatest problems in their lives. And many times it's just a call for help that they are doing. Do not take things personal. Oftentimes as a chaplain, there were things that have been shared with me that I have had to learn not to take things personal. They were said to me as a reflection of who I was as a pastor, as a representative of God. Here on earth, for example, there were other things that were said in anger, but there were also other things that were said in frustration that were a reflection of what the other person was going through and not necessarily of who I was. Many times there is a temptation for caregivers to feel responsible, to feel for the outcome of the patient or to feel for the outcome of the officer or whoever the person is that is going through that situation. And sometimes we just cannot help. And sometimes we feel responsible for that. The reality is that we cannot help everybody. But at the end of the day, we need to find comfort in the realization that we did our best. You know, one of my favorite quotes, and this is something that I remember reading this quote a long time ago, and I don't even remember it, only by memory now. But if you endeavor to do your very best in all that matters most, you can wait for the results in peace. Number 7, we can become love finders rather than fault finders. When we look at someone else, and there have been situations in which, yes, we have come across different and difficult people, Yes, there has been situations and we have come across difficult people, but if we look at people and we see them and we look at them and we search and we become love finders and not fault finders, more than not, we will see the good in them. Number 8, never take hope away from people. If there is one thing that I have been very careful, and I will actually throw this here, but I will share this with you. I have tried never to take hope away from anybody. My responsibility, by the way, have always been to try to bring love and hope to others. I have never tried to be a judge of anybody. I have never tried to put myself. By the way, if there's one thing that I have never done is either try to put myself in God's place or actually try to limit God. To say, if you do this, then that means that you're saved or you're a good person, or if you don't do that, who am I to judge? I am the last person to judge. I am here, whether as a pastor, as a police chaplain, as a professor, anything, I am here to be an instrument of love, of care, and healing through everyone that I come into contact with. And the last one that I do want to share with you is prayer. Oftentimes, in my position as a police chaplain, and by the way, I do want to share this with you. As a police chaplain, I have seen people killed in front of me. I was part of a first response team to a house. As we were walking in, the person put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger right in front of me. So it was a painful situation. It was a very critical situation, traumatic situation. There were other situations. Example, during September 11, 2001, I was in Los Angeles. And so I had to do many, many services throughout the Southern California area, for services. And there were other situations. But it has always been my purpose to be able to be an instrument of love, of care, of healing for them. And so part of my ministry has always been prayer for the officers, for family members. There were many situations in which I had to go to families' homes to announce the death of a fellow officer. And there were situations in which I have often asked myself, what is the purpose of all of this? You know, where I have asked myself, where was God in situations like this? And as I've been in situations like this many times, and have asked myself many, many times these questions, and this is just me, this is for me, more and more I have come to my own personal response, and that is that, you know, prayer is not about asking God about one thing or another, or asking God to do this or not to do this or to why. But prayer is about relationship. It's about relationship. That whatever happens, you know, whatever happens, God is there. So where was God in tragic situations? He was there. Where was God in my life or in your life when there were situations that sometimes we thought we couldn't get through? He was there. And so as I look at prayer, I see prayer as more than asking God again for this or for that. Prayer has to do again with relationships. So may God bless you in the wonderful, the essential, the blessed work that you do. And until Christ comes again, you know, may you be his hands and his feet to those that you minister each and every day. May God bless you.
Thank you for being a part of the 3rd Adventist Chaplains World Congress. It's time to take a break. We encourage you to get up and stretch, drink some water, and move around during the next 5 minutes. If you haven't liked and subscribed to the Adventist Chaplains YouTube channel, this is a perfect time to do that. Listen for the prompt of when the program will continue. It's time to continue the Third Adventist Chaplains World Congress. Please join us as we continue the next session.
Mario, my older brother, worked for General Motors for years. He earned a doctorate in psychology as an industrial psychologist. Chaplain Chipeta is also an industrial psychologist. He's going to share with us some things about law enforcement chaplaincy and industrial psychology. He believes that understanding the behavior and relationship of people in the workplace is important, and he knows so because that's the field of industrial psychology. Chaplain Chipeta will provide an overview of this essential area of psychology in his presentation titled Law Enforcement Chaplaincy and Industrial Psychology.
Welcome. This is another presentation on law enforcement chaplaincy and industrial psychology. This is an exciting topic, law enforcement chaplaincy and industrial psychology. How do you relate industrial psychological issues into law enforcement chaplaincy? If you become a law enforcement chaplain, there are industrial psychological issues that you need to know. In other words, as a chaplain, you need to be conversant with personal issues. So industrial psychology basically deals with personnel psychology. How do you develop the interpersonal skills? And also industrial psychology deals with organizational psychology. You need to understand, as a law enforcement chaplain, you need to understand the organization in which you are working, the agency in which you are working. If you are a campus chaplain, you need to understand the organization you are working. If you are a military chaplain, you need to understand the organization which you are working. If you are a healthcare chaplain, you need to understand the organization in which you are working. If you are a correctional chaplain, everyone needs industrial psychology. In other words, you need to understand the personnel psychology. You need to understand the organizational psychology. You need to understand the environmental psychology. All these issues, environmental psychology, organizational psychology, and also personnel psychology, they are under the umbrella of industrial psychology. So as a law enforcement chaplain, you need to have personnel skills. You need to have organizational skills. You need to have environmental skills. Basically, I'm looking at the connection of a law enforcement chaplain and industrial psychology. Welcome. This is another important presentation which you are going to be blessed in a special way. Let us pray. Our kind and gracious Father, we thank you this moment because of chaplains working in various fields, but particularly those chaplains working in the law enforcement chaplaincy. Father, may you bless them. May you remember them wherever they are. May you take care of them wherever they are. Father, may you intervene on whatever challenges they are going through, and may they understand and also get acquainted with those industrial politics that are going around in the law enforcement chaplaincy. Father, may you bless your chaplains as they listen to this wonderful presentation. I pray in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. This presentation, as I've welcomed you already, this is another wonderful presentation. Let us look at the definition of industrial psychology. Basically, when you talk of industrial psychology, you are talking of industry and psychology. So you are combining the psychological principles in the industry. How psychological principles apply in the industry of chaplaincy. Basically, that's what I'm going to try to argue in this presentation. So the definition of industrial psychology is the application of psychological principles and techniques to the business and industrial problems, as in the selection of personnel and the development of training programs. So in other words, when you are dealing with industrial psychology, you are talking of psychological principles at the workplace. In the law enforcement chaplaincy, how do you apply industrial psychology principles at the workplace or in the law enforcement chaplain? As a chaplain, you need to understand the industrial psychological issues, the organizational psychological issues, the environmental psychological issues that apply in the law enforcement chaplaincy. Industrial psychology basically is the study of the behavior and relationships of the people in the places where they work. So you are looking at the behavior and relationships of people that are there in the places where chaplains work. Chaplains need to understand the behaviors of people. Chaplains need to understand the relationships among people. Chaplains need to understand even the work environment where they are working. Basically, you need also to appreciate the history of industrial psychology. Industrial psychology, the text applying psychology to the business, first appeared in 1903. So it was first in industrial organizational psychology. The text appeared in 1910, according to Rande, 1997. In other words, Rande is saying the first text appeared in 1903, and also in the industrial organizational psychology, it appeared in 1910. So basically, the 20th century, that's when industrial and organizational psychology appeared. Basically, in personnel psychology, you need to understand the recruitment procedure as a chaplain. Industrial psychology has to do with recruitment processes in the personnel psychology, and also has to do with personality tests. So as a chaplain in the law enforcement chaplain, you need to understand that basically there are three procedures, like in the context of my police service, where I'm serving as a Seventh-day Adventist chaplain. There are three procedures for you to join as a law enforcement chaplain. You can join as a volunteer chaplain. You can join as also on contract as a contract chaplain. You can also join as a full law enforcement chaplain. I joined as a full law enforcement chaplain. But we have one Presbyterian who is working on contract. We also have one who is working as a Catholic chaplain working on contract. And these contracts, they are in a 3-year basis. But if you join as a full-time law enforcement chaplain, you go through the training. So you need to understand the dynamics. You need to understand these recruitment processes, because they help you to speak their language. They help you to contextualize the ministry. In other words, industrial psychology has to do with recruitment procedures. If you understand the recruitment procedures of your agency, of your police agency, how they recruit chaplains, you can easily join as a law enforcement chaplain. But without industrial psychology concepts or understanding the recruitment procedures, you will not be able to enter and join and be recruited as a law enforcement chaplain. So you need to understand the recruitment procedures. Basically, this is a concept which is there in industrial psychology as part of personnel psychology. And also in the area of personnel psychology, you need to understand the 5-factor model of personality test. And actually, when we talk about the 5-factor model of personality test in industrial psychology, it's very, very critical as a chaplain to know these basic concepts of personality test. And the 5-factor model, also known as the Big 5, You need to understand this in industrial psychology. The first concept in the personality test in industrial psychology, as a chaplain, as a law enforcement chaplain, which you need to understand, the first personality test is that of openness. How open are you as a chaplain? Actually, we have an acronym, OCEAN or canoe. It means openness, and then consciousness, and also agreeableness, and also you need to understand the emotional stability, which is you need to understand how you are stable are you emotional, and also apart from understanding the openness, the consciousness, and also the extraversion. So we are talking of ocean. We are also talking of openness. We are talking of consciousness. We are also talking of emotional stability, and also we are talking of agreeableness, and also we are talking about neutralistic emotional stability, in other words. So you need to understand those concepts, the 5-factor model of personality test. In other words, in industrial psychology, you cannot be an industrial psychologist if you don't understand the personality test. This helps you in the strategic allocation of people. So as a chaplain, you need to understand, as a law enforcement chaplain, you need to understand the 5-factor model of personality test. How openness are you as a chaplain? You need to be open. And also, as you practice openness or the open door theory, you need also to have, you don't need to lose the individual consciousness as a chaplain. Remember, you are an Adventist chaplain. You are hired to work among non-Adventists. So as a chaplain, you need to be conscious. You don't need to seal your conscience. You need always to remind consciously. You need also to have that consciousness to say, I'm an Adventist chaplain, representing the Adventist message, representing the God of heaven, representing Jesus Christ among the non-Adventists. Jesus Christ, although he mingled with the Samaritans, he did not lose his consciousness of saving human beings. Jesus Christ did not lose his consciousness among the Pharisees. Jesus Christ, he did not lose his consciousness among the Pharisees. Jesus Christ did not lose his consciousness. In other words, as a chaplain, as a law enforcement chaplain, or as a chaplain, a campus chaplain, as a hospital chaplain, as a correctional chaplain, as a workplace chaplain, you don't need to lose the consciousness that I am an Adventist chaplain. You don't need, apart from being openness, you also don't need to lose the consciousness. But apart from that also, you need to also have that skill of extraversion. In industrial psychology, when you talk of extraversion, is being sociable. You are in interpersonal relationship management is very, very critical in law enforcement chaplaincy. In other words, as a chaplain, you need, how extraversion are you? How sociable are you? How do you relate to people? Relationship management in law enforcement chaplaincy is very, very critical. You need to have people skills. In other words, chaplaincy is not about programs. It's about people. Chaplaincy is not about being strategic. You also need to have people skills. Jesus Christ had the welfare of the people at heart. Jesus Christ said, I have come to liberate the poor. I have come to bring justice to the poor. In other words, as a chaplain, you need to be sociable. You need to have social skills. You need to be people-oriented. You need to have that extraversion, which is another personality test, which is very, very significant in the law enforcement chaplaincy. Apart from that, you also need to have agreeableness. How agreeable are you as a chaplain? How agreeable are you in your ministry? You need to be agreeable to your leadership at the union. You need to be agreeable to your leadership at the division. You need to be agreeable to your leadership at the general conference. We cannot afford to have a minister. We cannot afford to have a chaplain in the law enforcement chaplaincy who is not able to agree with the chain of command within the law enforcement chaplaincy, who is not able to have agreeable skills with the leadership. I'm not saying you should compromise your faith. No. Agreeable skills is that of relating with your bosses well, because the chain of command, the industrial psychology of law enforcement chaplaincy demands that you obey the seniors, you obey those who are above you, you obey the chain of command and command protocol. So you need to have agreeable skills. In other words, I've talked of openness, I've talked of consciousness, I have also talked of extraversion or sociable skills, I've also talked of openness. But you also need to have emotional stability. In the 5-factor model of personality test, you need also to have emotional stability. How stable are you as a chaplain? You need to be stable, emotionally stable, because you are going to be exposed to stressful scenarios. For example, you are helping police officers, the line of duty death of a police officer who has died in line of duty. And especially this COVID crisis has brought in stressful moments, has brought in stressful conditions, where as a chaplain, you need to have that hypervigilance. You also need to be alert always. In other words, I'll give you a practical example. In the emotional stability, I happened to encounter a situation amidst the COVID crisis as a police chaplain, where we lost a police officer who has died because of COVID. And not only one, a week later, we also lost another police officer due to COVID crisis. And we as chaplains, we were in the forefront comforting the family. Now with the social distance, with all the preventive measures, as a chaplain, you would also be worried to say, what is going to happen to me? Am I going to be vulnerable to COVID situation? Or am I going to succumb to the COVID virus? But as a chaplain, you need also to be emotionally stable. Apart from being exposed to such stressful situations, you see the family crying, or they are mourning their loved one. You need to be emotionally stable. Because as a chaplain, if you also join the family crying, then they will have no one to comfort the family. These are very, very basic skills that you as a chaplain, industrial psychological skills that a chaplain needs to know. But apart from that also, as a chaplain, apart from the personnel skills, you also need to understand the organizational environment, also psychology, and also the environmental psychology that you are dealing with. You are dealing with police officers who are going through the post-traumatic stress disorder. You are dealing with police officers who are working in the environment which is very stressful. They are working with minimal resources. They are working under very difficult circumstances where corruption issues are very high, where we are talking about police brutality. We are talking of abuse of police officers. Recently, there was a case in Wisconsin in the US where police officers had to shoot a person. It was all over in the media. The question is, as a law enforcement chaplain, how do you deal with such environment? So basically, industrial psychology prepares you to know the environment in which you are operating, to know the environment and understand and appreciate where police officers are working. And apart from that, industrial psychology helps law enforcement chaplains to be smart. You need to be smart in your way of doing things. By being smart, what I mean is you need to be specific in your strategy to say, what do I want to achieve as a Seventh-day Adventist chaplain? Remember, the goal of having Seventh-day Adventist chaplains in these settings is that these chaplains must also reach out to public institutions. So you need to be specific by making the discipleship possible. And also you need to be measurable and motivational. You need to be motivated as a chaplain. You also need to be accountable to your leadership. You also need to be responsible and realistic. That's what I mean by being smart. And also you need to be touchable or time bound to say, by such a goal, what do I want to achieve in my period of stay? In other words, we have so many opportunities. In industrial psychology, you have to be smart as a law enforcement chaplain. And not only a law enforcement chaplain, but also you are working in the campus chaplain. You are also working as a healthcare chaplain. You are also working as a correctional chaplain. You are also working in military chaplaincy. You have to be smart. And the industrial psychology helps law enforcement chaplains to be smart in their way of doing things. It is only when they are smart that they are going to relate to the people well. It is only when they are smart that they are not going to digress from the mission, from God's mission, and from the three angels' message, and also from God's message and mission that we have of preparing people for the second coming of Jesus Christ. This is very significant, that chaplains in industrial psychology that prepares chaplains to be smart, they have to be smart. You can work hard as a law enforcement chaplain. Many chaplains, I've met several chaplains. Chaplain, I work hard. Yes, you work hard. It's very important. But it is high time that you need to be smart. You need to be smart in your way of doing things. You need to be smart as a person. You need to be smart in your approach. You need to be smart in being mission focused. And industrial psychology does not only prepare a chaplain, a law enforcement chaplain, to be smart, but also in industrial psychology prepares a person to have that job satisfaction. And this job satisfaction, according to Rock in industrial psychology, defines job satisfaction as a positive emotional state which results from appraisal of one's job experiences. So it goes with the job attitude. So you have the positive attitude towards the job so that you have the job satisfaction. You cannot have a positive emotional state. You cannot be satisfied in the law enforcement chaplaincy unless you have self-motivation. So you need to understand an industrial psychology concept of job satisfaction, which helps you to have self-motivation in the law enforcement chaplaincy. Unless you have self-motivation, that as a chaplain, you will be successful. It is at this point that I also want to bring to your attention that industrial psychology has a concept of intelligence at the workplace. As a chaplain, you need to have intelligence at the workplace for you to be successful in chaplaincy. So this intelligence comes in fivefold areas. Number one, there is an area of social intelligence. As a chaplain, you need to have social intelligence. How do you relate socially with your clients? How do you relate? You need to be sociable, as I already alluded to. So social intelligence in industrial psychology is very, very critical. As chaplains in law enforcement chaplaincy, we need to have social intelligence. Another intelligence at the workplace as a law enforcement chaplain is job performance. We need to perform and also convince our bosses, chief chaplains or inspector generals or the command, so that they build the trust. We need to have job performance. And another industrial, psychology intelligence at the workplace is the conflict management. You need to have conflict management skills because people have conflicts at the workplace. People have conflicts in their marriages. People have conflicts, and conflicts are everywhere in the law enforcement chaplains. As a chaplain, you need to have conflict management skills. And another concept in the intelligence at the workplace in industrial psychology that can help the law enforcement chaplains is knowing the industrial governance. Knowing the industrial governance, chaplaincy, law enforcement chaplaincy deals with protocols and also chain of command. Unless you appreciate the chain of command, you need to understand to say, my seniors, these are my seniors. So you give them the respect that they deserve. That is knowing the industrial governance, the governance structure, the organogram of your organization in the police agency. It helps you as a law enforcement chaplain to be successful in your work. And not only that, you also need to understand the industrial politics. So industrial psychology prepares you to understand the industrial politics which are there as a chaplain of your denomination and also working with other denominations. In other words, this presentation prepares chaplains in that area.
As a chaplain with the police, being in the police car, it must be interesting.
I think it is.
Especially if the siren goes on and then you are doing something that is interesting. And I imagine there are times for that. But what about when the time is for yes, you be with them? There is, what do you do with them? Chaplain Dan Pabon has a special presentation. What do you do when you are in the cruiser with your officers? As a law enforcement chaplain, your role is to be a friend and to listen. It is not time for a sermon or a Bible study. Chaplain Dan Pabon explores how to best use these important moments to minister to the officers that are under your care.
Greetings, folks. It's good to be here. Today I'll be discussing LEC, Law Enforcement Chaplains. It's a very interesting topic. I need to use my time wisely because there's so many topics we can cover. There's so many things we can talk about. But then you realize, as I do, that in order to be a law enforcement chaplain for any department in the world, I'm talking now North America, you need to be an ordained minister. Most police departments, the first person you get to interview, the first person you get to know and talk, and he or she asks you questions, is the local police chief. Now, it depends what, let's say you're assigned to be a pastor of a small town. As a minister of a church in that town, one of the first things I try to visit and let him know I'm in the area now is the mayor of the city, if possible. But mostly the chief of police. And just call the station, talk to the secretary, let him know who you are. You're the new pastor of one of the local churches and you like to present yourself a servant of the city and possibly to talk to the chief of police. And she'll make the appointment with you. I've done it 3 times. They always call you back because they like to welcome the new pastor, possibly a new chaplain. And you might even tell the secretary, I would like to take the chief out for dinner so we can talk about this. And they say, sure, but the moment when it comes to pay for the dinner, you cannot pay. They have to pay. That's the way they have a budget for that. But at least you tell them your good intentions because the law requires that if anybody privately pays, then it's a compromise. There's a big protocol in there. But it's good to let the police chief know I'm here, this is my church. And if you don't have a chaplain, I'd love to experiment, be a chaplain with your department. For 2 cities that I've been chaplain before, Tacoma Park, Maryland was one of them. Winter Harbor Police Department was another one in Illinois. I did that. I called the police department, had dinner with the chief, and eventually I became the chaplain. In big cities, most of them like Orlando Police Department, that's what I started, they require their chaplains or the future chaplains, prospective chaplains, you want to call them that way, they need to go to what is called Citizens Police Academy. It's like a police academy for non-officers, for people like chaplains. Once you go through that course, it's about maybe 12 weeks or so on. Once a week you go, take the classes, Everything that police officers do, you know, they teach you. You get to watch them, you get to patrol with one of them once and ride along and so on. And eventually, once you graduate, you become officially their police chaplain. Now, Orlando is a big city. And there were 5 of us, 5 chaplains when I was accepted. The fact that I happen to be bilingual helped a lot. And it does help if you're a bilingual chaplain. But again, if you control the language properly, there's no problem. They like to welcome you. That's the way it is. They provide you with all kinds of things. And except a gun, you get a uniform, you get the famous badge which you put around your neck when you're patrolling with them. When you're with a suit in a funeral or something, you have another badge that goes into your suit and so on. But all this identifies you as a chaplain. However, does everybody qualifies to be a chaplain? I'm a minister. I have perhaps a master in divinity. I went to the academy and so on. But before you do that, when they interview you, especially the police chief, he'll ask you key questions. There are all kinds of questions regarding what would you do if this happened when you're patrolling with the officers? What do you do when a police officer is in pain, is in stress? All these questions come along. And the reason they ask you to ride along once for 4 or 5 hours, one of the officers, is because they need to know if the police officers like you or you like them. Does every minister qualifies to be a chaplain? I don't have an answer for it. My opinion is no, not every pastor qualifies for it. A good percentage, many, I would say 90% of them qualify. But then you need to ask yourself the question, why I want to be a police chaplain? To be honest, it's fun. That's my answer, my own answer. It's fun. It's fun to ride along, be in the car, play with the siren, help them out, and so on. But we come to that a little later. But number 2, I am willing to minister to a segment of society that is very suspicious. Segment of society that they just listen and listen and listen. And that's police officers. You might be a pastor. You might have a congregation. You might baptize many people. You might be a popular pastor, a good preacher. But again, does that qualify you to get inside of a government car, patrol with them for 5, 6, 8 hours sometimes? I've been 8 hours straight. And what did you do? What do the officers expect from you? Another cop? No. See, you have a badge, yes. It's a law enforcement badge. You have a radio that they provide you. You have a belt with a big, good flashlight. How I said no gun. Because if you carry a gun, even though you might own your own gun and you might, carry it around, but not while you're patrolling, because you're a minister for the officers. And because the fact that you went to academy all this time, you took all these courses, you know exactly what they're doing, you know exactly the words they use on the radio, all these different numbers, 10-4, 10-20, 10-18, all that stuff comes along. The chaplain needs to know that. But again, the police officer sees you, he's driving, you're riding with him, he sees you as a pastor, not as another cop. That's why we don't carry guns when we patrol. The first question they might ask you the first time you patrol with one of them, the first question they ask you is, why are you a police chaplain? They need to know you. Like the police chief said, they need to like you and you need to like them. If they don't like you, if you ask the wrong question, if you talk more than you have to, you're really not a candidate for the chaplaincy, because that police officer is going to give a report of his 5 or 6 hours he spent with you. Now, we had a situation down in Orlando. You would never know the name of the chaplain. It was a chaplain. And because he had a badge, because he had a body armor that he wore once in a while, he took into the habit of driving on his own private car. He even got blue lights, which is against the law. Your private car does shouldn't have the blue lights. That's only for government cars. And he will act as a cop. A couple of times he stopped people on the street because he had blue lights on his car. He has a badge. Of course, he doesn't wear a gun, but he got out of the car and he will stop people. Either they might be speeding or doing something. They were missing a light. They didn't stop at the stop sign. So this chaplain got into the habit of stopping people, show the badge, and scare them up. Be careful how you drive. You're going too fast. Don't do that. Next time you get a ticket. That's all he could say. Until one day, another chief of police who was driving his own private car saw this person, this chaplain, saw the car, saw the blue lights on, saw this chaplain going into his own private car, and he said, I wonder what police department he belongs. So this chief of police who was driving his car, he calls the main chief in Orlando. He said, do you have somebody that looks like this and this and this and this with this kind of car and so on? And the police chief on the Orlando said, no, we don't. But I think we know what you're talking about. And so on, they discovered that one of the chaplains would play cops when he was by himself. Can't do that. Actually, he was called. He was asked to explain why he did what he did. Well, we need to let you know that he stopped being a chaplain. They took his badge away from him. They took everything else, his credentials, which is the identification you get at police, and he no longer is a chaplain with the department. When I was interviewed for the job, the captain in charge of the chaplain told me the story I just told you about this chaplain who stopped people. He said, Pastor, if he wanted to be a police cop, let him go to police academy, not divinity school. They're two different things. He's here to help us out. So that's one of the questions that perhaps if you want to be a police chaplain as a minister, why do I want to do that? Do I want to do it because I want to help a segment of society that does not communicate with anybody else except someone who has gone what they've gone through? Police officers do not talk to everybody, even pastors, like I said earlier, because they don't know what's going on. But the moment they put you in that car, you ride along, it is your duty to be there for the officer. It is your duty to be there in case an emergency comes up. It is your duty to be there in case there's fatality. And I've gone through many of those in the city of Orlando. I have so many stories. When the chaplain was called 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and he's needed at the station because the chaplain is the only one that the officers trust to go to a family, to knock the door, and let the people know that there was fatality. A son, a daughter, a husband, a wife, a motorcycle accident. They lean on the chaplain for that. That's perhaps the reason I did it. Now, when I was a little kid, my uncle tells me, every time they ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? I will say the same thing. I want to be a police officer. Policía in Spanish. I want to be a police officer when I grow up. And I will answer the same thing. Of course, the Lord has different plans for me. I choose the ministry, which is a deeper subject. You can go deep and never, as a pastor. But then again, you can use those talents as a pastor to help the segment of society who the only person that will talk will be you. Now, if you're willing, and this is one thing that I will advise you, if you have a family and children, I hope that you have a good conversation with your wife about this before you decide to be a police chaplain. I see many cases, many pastors who want to be police chaplains, but then back home. But when they realize that you're probably you're in the safest place. Nowadays, a little different. When there's a situation that there are shots being fired or there's guns drawn out, the chaplain stays in the car. You don't go anywhere. You'll be praying for your officer who's out there a couple of blocks away in a situation. And you'll be praying for the holy angels to be with you and to take care of your officers. Because when they come back to the car, they'll tell you everything that happened. Don't be afraid to ask them, everything okay? And they'll tell you everything. And then you know inside you, I was praying for that. And I'm glad that I prayed because my officer is back safe. Let's continue along. Make sure that besides talking to your family about it, in my case, I was very blessed that my wife never had an objection. She knew I liked to do it. It was my way of just take everything out of my heart. It was my playtime, being in a police car with the uniform and the badge, talking to the officer and stopping people and so on. I got all kinds of beautiful stories. And the chaplain is there for help. But besides talking to your wife, make sure everything is clear with her. Let her know, honey, he's going to be patrolling once a week, maybe 2 or 3 hours. I'll be back home. Well, of course, your wife is going to wait for you until you get back, make sure you're okay. Talk to your conference president. Are you Seventh-day Adventist pastor? You know they have jurisdiction over us. And let him know, I'm interested to be a police chaplain in my church, my town, where my church is. And most conference presidents will definitely back you up. Now, there have been situations, and perhaps I might be the victim of one, that my conference president didn't like the idea, and he says, you need to stop doing that. Now, I saw it as community service from a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, because the moment you get into the car, the moment the police officers at the station know you, they know you're the pastor of the local church, they know the address of the church, and if anything happened to that address, they'll be there immediately. Why? Because the pastor of the church is our chaplain, and that's a good advantage. And many times, these police officers might bring you to a neighborhood where families are, especially during the Thanksgiving season and Christmas season, where some families might need food. That's what the church is there for. And you can be a medium between the family, the police department, and the church to do community services. Unfortunately, I was told later to stop doing that completely. But I'm glad that the Adventist Chaplaincy Ministry are good at this. They do support pastors who are chaplains, and there's a good number of pastors who are chaplains, including 2 conference presidents in North America who are chaplains of the police department. Once you get that clear, once you record, of course, you have to realize that in my case in Orlando, when I was accepted, I needed to go through a special test and a polygraph test you have to take. Your records will be clean and so on before they can give you the badge and they can put you officially as a chaplain. Now, what you do, you're going to be patrolling with different officers. Sometimes the chief of police, like in my case, a chief of police, which happens to be a congresswoman now here in Washington. She was my chief of police back in Orlando. They might ask you, or they might ask the sergeant of certain squad for the chaplain to patrol with certain officer who's facing some problems. And I'll be quick on this one because this happened. This police officer apparently fell in love with a female police officer. He was married with children back home. Perhaps he was going through a divorce or something, which is fine. I mean, for me now, but for him, it's okay. I'm not going to hold that against him. But he was dedicating a lot of time with this officer, not in uniform, but he was not catering. He was not fulfilling his obligation as a dad to give food to his children. Well, the wife of the officer called the police department. She spoke to the chief. And she said, my kids need to eat. So when the chief of police realized there was one of his officers, he told the wife, we'll take care of that. We'll get back to you. The police chief calls the sergeant calls me and says, Chaplain, the police wants you to ride along with such and such police officer. They explained the situation, what it was. At a particular time, I was assigned with this police officer. But the main thing for me was to pray, ask the Lord, give me the words to talk to this man at the right moment. I didn't want to talk to him immediately. We started the patrol, and he's on the phone, he's on the radio, the calls coming through. But perhaps 2 or 3 hours into the ride along, I finally said, this is the time. I said to myself, and I said, you know, it's been fun riding along with you. You're a good cop, but there's something that I need to talk to you about, and this is only between you, the Lord, and I. Nobody else knows this. I told him the situation. I said, whatever you do in your private life is not my business. And that's what every chaplain should remember. That's their life. You're there to minister to them, to pray for them. And we're going to talk about that in another segment, you know, to pray or not to pray. But I told him I need to go back to the chief and give him 2 options. One of them is they can go to your squad and ask every officer to donate 5 hours of their pay time off. That becomes money, so they can have a collection and buy food for your children. The officer said, oh, no, chaplain, please don't. Well, let me give you my second option. I need to go back to the chief next Tuesday, let him know that I spoke to you, that you're going to take care of this immediately, and nobody else needs to know. Because if we take option A, collecting money from the other, they're going to find out. I mean, they find out at the next Dunkin' Donuts meeting and so on, when they're having a half-hour lunch, they're going to find out. And he knew that. So he didn't want to go that way. And he said, chaplain, I'll take care of it. I will go, I will take care of my children immediately. And I said again, your private life is not my business. But I just want to help you out because your children is my business. Well, resolved, I went to the chief, the police officer did what he was supposed to do. See, those are situations that you get involved as a pastor, but still you're a friend to these officers. They trust you. And like that case that I went through in Orlando, there might be many more cases. Problems with their children, problems with their wives or husbands, if the officer is a female officer. You're there for a reason. It's fun to do it. It is good. But remember, as a minister, you are really ministering to a segment of society that no one else can do except a police chaplain. God bless you.
Thank you for being a part of the 3rd Adventist Chaplains World Congress. It's time to take a break. We encourage you to get up and stretch, drink some water, and move around during the next 5 minutes. If you haven't liked and subscribed to the Adventist Chaplains YouTube channel, this is a perfect time to do that. Listen for the prompt of when the program will continue. It's time to continue the third Adventist Chaplains World Congress. Please join us as we continue the next session.
Chaplain Mabvuto Chipeta, you and I met him in Malawi.
Yes.
Today, he is one of the 3 top chaplains in the police of the country.
Wow.
And he will talk to us about one thing that is very much in our minds. And it's that saying that when we are called, we can say, I will go. Chaplain Chipeta will talk about the fulfillment of the Great Commission. How does law enforcement chaplaincy fulfill our calling to be part of the Great Commission? Chaplain Mabvuto Chipeta also shares exciting stories from his law enforcement chaplaincy and ministry.
My presentation is entitled The Impact of Law Enforcement Chaplaincy in the Fulfillment of the Great Commission. So we are looking at the impact of law enforcement chaplaincy in the fulfillment of the Great Commission. In other words, what impact does the law enforcement chaplaincy have on the Great Commission? If you look at the Great Commission as commanded by God himself, and also in the book of Matthew, where it says, go and make disciples. How can we make disciples in our own context? How can we make disciples? Actually, it's very easy to make disciples in our spheres, various spheres, as ministers of the gospel. But as chaplains, how can you make the Great Commission possible? How can you make disciples in the area, in non-denominational institutions like law enforcement agencies, institutions that are difficult to reach out? This is the presentation, the gist, and also the thrust of this presentation is focused on the impact of law enforcement chaplaincy in the fulfillment of the Great Commission. How can we make disciples of Jesus Christ in the law enforcement chaplaincy, or in the public sector, or in areas where they are difficult to reach out? That's where you will appreciate the role of enforcement chaplaincy in the fulfillment of the Great Commission. I am privileged that as a chaplain, I have been exposed to the 2020, the next 5-year strategic plan of the General Conference talks about I will go. When Isaiah was being called by Jesus Christ, as by God himself through the power of the Holy Spirit, as God was calling Isaiah in chapter 6, say, who do I send? And Isaiah says, I will go. He did not hesitate. The question is, as we go out, how do we reach out to members? How do we reach out to non-members in public institutions? How do we make the mission possible? How do we make spiritual nurturing possible? How do we make leadership possible? These are the 3 emphases in I Will Go strategic plan for the next quinquennium. So this is possible through the law enforcement chaplaincy, as we are going to look at the impact of law enforcement chaplaincy in the fulfillment of Great Commission. You will be pleased and you appreciate that in Malawi, law enforcement chaplaincy has done a lot in the accomplishment of the Great Commission. In the area of spiritual nurturing, we were privileged through the chaplaincy because of the presence of an Adventist chaplain in the Malawi Police Service. We were privileged to do the spiritual nurturing to spouses and couples of police officers through our family ministries director from the division, SID, Dr. and Mrs. and Shepherdess Rakwena. They came to help in the spiritual nurturing of police couples. You would appreciate that in the Malay police chaplaincy or in law enforcement chaplaincy, you will discover that one of the critical issues that police officers face as couples, as families, is divorce issues. Everywhere you go in the law enforcement chaplaincy, marital issues are an issue that needs attention by the chaplain. So we are privileged because of the presence of an Adventist chaplain. We were able to conduct the family enrichment seminar to police couples right at the Malay Police Headquarters. And this was done through our leader of the Family Ministries Director at the Southern African Indian Ocean Division, Dr. and Mrs. Rakwena. They came through the Malay Union Conference Family Ministries Director, who is Pastor Goodwin Swande. So this was possible. And we had a week-long seminar in the spiritual nurturing. You can see the impact of Adventism, reaching out to non-Adventists through family ministries seminar. This is one great strategy. If you are to reach out to non-Adventist circles, especially in the law enforcement chaplaincy, you do family enrichment seminar. And this seminar was conducted for the whole week. And one critical topic that Dr. and Shepherdess Rakwena had presented was on the family tree, where he discussed and presented to say most of the problems that police officers are facing in their marriages, in their couples, in their families, they are emanating from generations to generations. They move from generations to generations. And if you don't understand the background of your marital conflict, you may not understand where this problem is coming from. So family trees from Abraham, from Isaac to Jacob, and as they continued, you trace that these families had problems that they encountered that emanated from generations, from their forefathers. In other words, police couples also face challenges that maybe come from generations, they run from generations to generations. So police officers were able to appreciate this presentation. And another presentation in the spiritual nurturing of families of police officers at Malay Police Headquarters throughout this week. Another presentation was also on building health families. How can police couples build health families? This was also one of the critical topics, to say you build the health families only when you realize the presence of Jesus Christ. So police officers and police couples were also strengthened. Apart from other approaches of building health families, police officers at the end of the seminar were able to make new commitments that they are going to build health families through prayers and through trusting God, and also doing away with some immoral behaviors and faithfulness. All those issues were discussed during the seminar. And on the same area, or in the same area of spiritual nourishing of police couples, Dr. and Shepherdess Rakwena from the division, through Malawi Union Family Ministries leader, Pastor Goodwin Swande, they were able also to appreciate another presentation on conflict management. How do you manage conflicts in families? How do you manage conflicts as couples? How do you manage conflicts? And it was a wonderful presentation on conflict resolution in the police couples. How would they resolve their conflicts? You know, police couples are faced with so many challenges of divorce and separation, and they were able to be nourished spiritually through this presentation to say the center of conflict management. They needed to understand the role of forgiveness. This was also another presentation on forgiveness, to say unless police couples are able to forgive one another, they will not be able to live as happy couples. And this was really enriching to police couples, and they were able to appreciate, to say forgiveness is one of the critical factors of making happy families among police couples. And also, this forgiveness had to reduce the levels of divorce among police officers at police headquarters, and also the issues of separation. This was also, the numbers have significantly reduced, and also cases in the social welfare to deal with conflicts, marital issues, have reduced out because of the result of this seminar which was conducted. But also another presentation which was very, very critical, which Dr. and Shepherdess Rakwena, the family ministries leader at the division, had presented to the police couples at Malai Police Headquarters. It was also an area of family therapy where also police couples would appreciate how to bring healing in their families. How would they bring healing? Not only through forgiveness, but reconciliation, and also how to keep, to raise their children, how to keep their children faithful, and also upbringing in the fear of the Lord. In other words, this was a wonderful seminar in the spiritual nurturing. So you can see the impact. The impact of law enforcement chaplaincy is that because of the presence of an Adventist chaplain, we were able to penetrate with the family ministries messages to the police couples at Malawi Police Headquarters. And it was a wonderful seminar. As you can see in the pictures, it was a wonderful seminar which was there and for the whole week. And police couples were very thankful. Not only that, but also the issue of leadership. You would also appreciate that law enforcement chaplaincy has made a great impact in the area of leadership. Through Elder Ceballos and also his support and his guidance, law enforcement chaplaincy is present now at the International Conference of Police Chaplains. We have our Adventist leaders who are able to make presentations annually at the International Conference of Police Chaplains. And as I'm speaking now, I am a certified instructor of International Conference of Police Chaplains through the leadership of Elder Ceballos at the General Conference, was able to prepare me to go through the processes up to the level of certification. And now I am also an endorsed chaplain. Through the leadership certification, we had to go through the training in 2018 in Pretoria through the leadership of Elder Ceballos and also our division chaplaincy leader and also Malawi Union leadership, who made it possible that the leadership of chaplaincy can continue to grow from strength to strength. And many chaplains have been endorsed in the entire division through his leadership. And not only this area, but also Elder Ceballos, through his leadership, he made it possible that pastors or chaplains are exposed to the clinical pastoral orientation and leadership at Malamulo Hospital, one of our oldest hospitals in Malawi. Chaplains were able to do clinical pastoral training. And I am privileged and also to report that in the area of leadership, now we have 7 endorsed chaplains in Malawi, and I'm one of the endorsed chaplains. So chaplaincy has an impact. And now we have a leader who is also representing the Seventh-day Adventist Church at Malawi Police Service. And it is through this leadership development that because of the presence of an Adventist leader who is working as a chaplain at Malawi Police Headquarters, the division leadership through Dr. and Shepherdess, Dr. and Shepherdess Rakwena, and also the executive secretary of Malawi Union, Pastor Innocent Chikomo, and also Pastor Goodwin Swandi, the family ministers leader. They were able in the area of leadership to interact with the leadership, the highest leadership of Malawi Police Service, they were able to interact with the leadership at Malay Police Service. So this helped to cement the relationship, to bridge the gap between Malay Police Service and the Seventh-day Adventist Church, such that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is able to do and conduct the services freely at Malay Police headquarters. So because of this leadership development, we have also seen the General Conference leader in the Youth Ministries Department, Police Service, in the area of youth ministries. And he came, and the place was granted to us, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, because of the presence of a chaplain, Seventh-day Adventist chaplain at Malay Police Headquarters. We were given the Inspector General's ground to conduct the youth rally, where our General Conference leader in the Youth Ministries Department was able to attend this rally. And not only that, law enforcement chaplaincy has not only made an impact in the spiritual nourishment, not only made an impact in the leadership development and also connection, but also the law enforcement chaplaincy has also made a great impact in the area of mission. The church cannot exist without fulfillment and accomplishment of the Great Commission. The church exists for mission. And it is because of this reason that because of the presence of an Adventist chaplain in Malay Police Service, we were able to send a chaplain to train for 6 months. And it was during this training that the chaplain was able to preach to an Adventist the Adventist message, the hope of the second coming of Jesus Christ. It was through the 3 angels' message that 8 police officers were baptized during the training because of the presence of an Adventist chaplain. And one of the police officers who was baptized and joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church was a Muslim police officer. It was really wonderful. You can see the impact of law enforcement chaplaincy in the fulfillment of the Great Commission. If it were not for the presence of this Adventist chaplain to do police training, he should have not been able to reach out to non-Adventist police officers. But we were able to baptize through the presence of an Adventist chaplain in the name of Mabvuto Chipeta, who is presenting to you right now. And right now he holds the rank of Inspector of Police. And we have been able as a church to reach out to the Malay Police Service, to non-Adventist police officers, because of the presence of an Adventist chaplain. And this Adventist chaplain is able even to visit non-Adventist police officers, is able even to do counseling to non-Adventist police officers. Through the presence of an Adventist chaplain, he is able even to make presentation, to do devotions to non-Adventist police officers at Malay Police Headquarters every Tuesday and every Thursday and Sabbath morning. He is able to reach out to non-Adventist police officers. You can see and appreciate the role of law enforcement chaplaincy in the fulfillment of Great Commission. And this chaplain was able to be sent to Australia to reach out to Victoria Police because of the presence of an Adventist chaplain. Malay Police Service was able to entrust this chaplain to go and make presentations in Australia to where they are non-Adventist, and he was able to interact with police officers in Victoria Police in Australia. Not only that, he was able to make a presentation at one of its kind, the Conference of Chaplains in Higher Education at Latrobe University, and the chaplain was able to be sent there under the auspices of Malay Police Service. So you can see that the law enforcement chaplaincy is making great impact. And this chaplain was able to interact with the Australian consular Trent Smith and was able to interact with the Australian police. Not only that, but also recently there has been a development where this chaplain is able to conduct weddings of police officers, weddings of Adventist police officers who needed the chaplain to be conducting these services. So the chaplain has been able to conduct several weddings because of his presence in the Malay Police Service. Not only that, but this chaplain has been able to reach out. He has become a model in training other chaplains within the Southern African Indian Ocean Division on what law enforcement chaplaincy is all about. And how can you prepare someone, an Adventist minister, to minister in the law enforcement chaplaincy? With all these, you can appreciate the role of law enforcement chaplaincy. To say it is important to have Adventist chaplains to work in the law enforcement chaplaincy because they are able to make a great impact in the area of mission. They are able to make a great impact in the area of leadership, and they are able to make a great impact in the area of spiritual nurturing of Adventist police officers working in public institutions. Therefore, we need to increase the number of chaplains. We need more Adventist pastors to work as chaplains in the law enforcement chaplaincy, because this is the only way the church can reach out to non-denominational institutions. This is the only way the church will be able to reach out to public institutions. This is the only way the church will be able to make an impact and bring change to people's lives. This is the only way the church is going to make discipleship possible. So let me appeal to you, my fellow chaplains, that wherever you are, may you think of working as a law enforcement chaplain. This is another area where we need more chaplains to work as law enforcement chaplains so that we can make I will go possible. If you are asked as a chaplain to say, whom do I send? If God is speaking to you to say, who do I send? And you find an opportunity to work in your police agency, you find an opportunity to work in the law enforcement agency as a chaplain, as an Adventist chaplain, may I encourage you that take that opportunity. It is the only way the Adventist message, the three angels message, can reach out in public institutions. It is the only way the Adventist message will be able to penetrate in public institutions. We need more Adventist chaplains. We need more Adventist chaplains to work as law enforcement chaplains. Whether at voluntary level as volunteer chaplains, you can also work. Whether as a full-time law enforcement chaplain, you can also work. Whether on contractual basis, depending on where you are and depending on the opportunity. Let's keep on seeking this opportunity to work as law enforcement chaplains. May God bless you as you are able now to appreciate the impact of law enforcement chaplains in the fulfillment of the Great Commission. May I appeal to you that if the call comes, you can work as a law enforcement chaplain, because this is the only way that the church can make an impact. May God bless you. May the Lord bless you as you think of working as a law enforcement chaplain. Thank you.
One of the most difficult things that affect people that are exposed to tragic situations and changes their life forever is moral injury. And police officers are confronted with traumatic events every day. In the presentation that we have, Dr. Chaplain Claudio Consuegra, his goal in the presentation is to inform and educate chaplains about moral injury so that they can be aware of what it is and learn how to recognize that in the officers that they are serving as chaplains, particularly those who have been witnessed or participated in traumatic events, such as the death of a person or taking the life of a person, or being unable to save a person's life.
The goal of this presentation is to inform and educate chaplains about moral injury so they can be aware of what it is and learn to recognize it in the officers they serve, particularly those who have been witnesses or participated in traumatic events such as the death of a person or taking the life of a person or being unable to save a person's life. One definition of moral injury is this. Moral injury is the suffering that people experience when they are in high-stakes situations, things go wrong, and harm results that challenges our deepest moral codes and ability to trust in others or ourselves. The harm may be something we did, something we witnessed, or something that was done to us. It results in moral emotions such as shame, guilt, self-condemnation, outrage, and sorrow. Where did this idea or concept of moral injury come from? The concept of moral distress and moral injury has existed in human knowledge and literature for a long time. In the Greco-Roman tradition, warrior narratives reference the experience of moral injury called miasma, or moral pollution and purification, and it described it as the effect of a critical situation wherein a person with legitimate and recognized authority betrays what is right. Through the years, other terms have been used to attempt to describe what a soldier or a peace officer experiences when they violate a deeply held principle such as the sanctity of life in the performance of their duties. Nostalgia was used by the Swiss Army, homesickness by the German Army, estar roto, to be broken, by the Spanish Army. A soldier's heart was used during the Civil War, shell shock during World War I, combat exhaustion during World War II, stress response syndrome during the Korean War, Vietnam syndrome during the Vietnam War, post-traumatic stress by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychological Association in 1980, and then PTSD and moral injury today. PTSD is defined as an anxiety condition that can develop after exposure to a traumatic event or ordeal in which grave physical harm occurred or was threatened. Moral injury, according to Litz, Stein, and their colleagues, is the lasting psychological, biological, spiritual, behavior, and social impact of perpetrating, failing to prevent, or bearing witness to acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. Please notice the several aspects of the definition. The impact is lasting in various areas: psychological, biological, spiritual, behavioral, and social. It impacts pretty much every area of your life. And it is caused by perpetrating, failing to prevent, or bearing witness to acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. PTSD and moral injury share some symptoms and experiences, but they also have unique ones. For instance, people with PTSD may experience startle reflex, memory loss, fear, flashbacks. People suffering from moral injury may experience sorrow, grief, regret, shame, and alienation. People experiencing both PTSD and moral injury may have anger, depression, anxiety, insomnia, nightmares, self-medication with drugs or alcohol. While we have mentioned the differences and commonalities between PTSD and moral injury, we want to focus more closely on the possible cues of moral injury. First of all, social and behavioral problems, such as social withdrawal and alienation, aggression, misconduct, acting in a way that may even break some laws, sociopathic behavior, behaviorally expresses an inability to get along with others or abide by social rules. Then they may also have trust issues, lack of trust in self or others, or spiritual and existential issues like loss of religious faith, loss of trust in morality, loss of meaning. What's the point of it all? Fatalism behaviorally expresses powerlessness or an attitude of resignation, negative changes in ethical attitudes and behavior. Then there are psychological symptoms like depression, anxiety, anger, impulse to seek revenge. Also self-deprecating emotions and cognitions like shame, guilt, self-loathing, behaviorally expresses self-blame, self-attack, and self-destructive behaviors. Feeling of being damaged. Unwanted re-experience of morally injurious events like nightmares, flashbacks, intrusive recollections. Events that may lead to moral injury may be death-related situations, killings, handling or uncovering human remains, seeing or touching severely wounded victims that the person was not able to help. Think about these in the context of a police officer who may be the first responder to a scene of a car accident where the victims were badly mangled, decapitated, or finding body parts strewn all over the road. Or consider the police officer who responds to the scene of a suicide and finding brain matter and blood on walls, bathtubs, or the floor. Or witnessing children who were being abused or who were killed, particularly at the hands of their own parents or caretakers, or at the hands of someone who had been arrested but set free by the court system. Similar to moral distress, individuals who suffer from moral injury may experience guilt, frustration, sense of rejection, difficulty forgiving, self-harm, and shame. They may also experience anhedonia, that is, they have lost interest in activities they used to enjoy, and have a decreased ability to feel pleasure. Some argue that moral injury is one of the precursors of PTSD symptoms. The documentary Soldiers of Conscience followed 8 U.S. soldiers today, some who killed and some who said no, and who revealed their inner moral dilemmas. It explores the tension between spiritual values and military orders. It follows the stories of both conscientious objectors and those who criticize them. Through this clash of views, the film discovers a surprising common ground. All soldiers are soldiers of conscience, torn between the demands of duty and the call of conscience. The documentary is a brave and balanced look at the choice a soldier makes when he finally must pull the trigger. But moral injury is not limited to military personnel, to those who go to a war zone. Peace officers also experience moral injury. In fact, just think about the connotation of the title peace officers. We use that term to refer to those who don't go to war to defend the people of our country, but who stay in the country to protect its people. But their job is far from peaceful. Peace officers confront violence almost on a daily basis, and even if they never shoot anybody or are never shot at, they will witness the horrors that soldiers see in the battlefield. Think about it for a moment. Who witnesses on a daily basis children being physically and sexually abused, people murdered in the streets, suicides, body parts following a violent accident, burned victims, drowned victims? But peace officers are also often confronted with situations that challenge a normal human being. Moral injury can occur in situations that, although not traumatic per se, may cause first responders to question their tactical decision-making or their ability to prevent what happened in the line of duty. For instance, inner conflict may arise when police officers must enforce a law that conflicts with their personal moral standards, such as when they arrest someone protesting for a cause they strongly favor. They have to stand and confront protesters that may be expressing views they share. Or peace officers may have to protect a person whom they consider morally repugnant. And of course, law enforcement officers may be confronted with the decision, often in a fraction of a second, to take a life. Most of us shudder at the thought of killing someone. Police officers do too. In more than 34 years as a police chaplain, I have never met a police officer, a sheriff's deputy, or a federal agent that looks forward to killing someone, even if it is a justifiable action. I remember talking to an officer who had just returned to duty after almost a year of being off following a shooting. As we rode together, I asked him to tell me what had happened. He told me the general details of how he had received a call to a possible break-in. He approached the apartment building when the perpetrator came out running around the garbage dumpster. The perpetrator looked at the officer and started to raise a gun toward the officer. The officer had already identified himself, had his gun pointed toward the perp, and in a fraction of a second had to make a life-changing decision for him and certainly for the perpetrator. And as he described it to me, I pulled the trigger and, well, he is no longer with us. I could tell in his face and in his voice that even though it was a justifiable action and he was cleared by the department, telling me the story was not easy. He never used the words, "I shot him" or "I killed him." Deep inside, you know you did the right thing and you live to tell about it. Deep inside, you know you did the right thing and live to tell about it, but also deep inside, you know you took someone else's life. They're no longer alive because of your actions. As I said, the internal investigation took a year. For a whole year, the officer's fate was out of his hands. He knew he had done the right thing, but would the department feel the same way? The fear of the unknown, the uncertainty, creates almost overwhelming stress. In a study conducted in 2010 of 60 different operational and organizational stressors common to law enforcement professionals, officers ranked killing someone during a use of force encounter as the most stressful experience in terms of coping with the aftermath. In 2 other studies, officers conveyed that making a mistake in the line of duty, resulting in the death of a colleague, would be the most stressful. Also, in terms of coping with the aftermath, from a list of 34 potentially traumatic experiences commonly experienced by officers, which included being threatened with a gun or witnessing someone being killed. Police officers must perform their task and make decisions in accordance with agency values. They have a mandate to do what is right, as well as to serve and protect with integrity and judiciousness. At the same time, officers commonly encounter gruesome crimes, atrocities, and death-related situations. In addition, they are often the first to respond to a critical incident scene and support those severely wounded or traumatized by a perpetrator or catastrophic event. If officers cannot save a gravely injured victim at the scene of a crisis, they may feel like failures. As a result, they may blame themselves and experience feelings of guilt, frustration, and shame. In cases where the traumatic events included the experience of a moral injury, research has found increased incidences of mental health issues such as post-traumatic stress disorder, substance abuse, and depression. Here's one of those extremely challenging situations which peace officers have to confront and in which they have to make life-changing or even life-ending decisions. Think of the justifiable on-duty shooting of someone who the officer thought may not necessarily have evil intent, but nonetheless was confused, disoriented, and threatening. For instance, people high on drugs such as PCP may not be armed. They may not even be clothed, but they can be extremely dangerous and could potentially hurt one or several officers or other people. Moral injury can compromise an officer's performance in the line of duty. It leaves the individual struggling with feelings of rejection, guilt, shame, and emotional paralysis, all detrimental to mental functioning and job performance. An example is what happened to a veteran police officer in a metropolitan city. The officer was pursuing a suspect. During the chase, a train struck and killed the individual. The officer, considered one of the best in the department, experienced moral conflict to the point of considering himself responsible for the suspect's death. Eventually, the officer died by suicide. In cases where an officer has killed a suspect, even when they are cleared of all wrongdoing, they feel a sense of responsibility. This is how an officer described this experience. It is this moral injury that sometimes feeds our anger the most. Everyone around you is treating you like a hero for having the courage to do what you had to do. Outwardly, you show appreciation for the supportive comments, but inwardly, you feel emotionally broken. As a chaplain, you may not be trained to offer intervention or therapy, but you may be able to identify the symptoms of one or several of your officers who may be experiencing moral injury or PTSD. In that case, your role is to encourage them, support them, and refer them to a professional. You may also be able to listen and help them through their spiritual struggles based on their own faith understanding, or to refer them to someone of their own faith tradition who may guide them in that journey. I pray you may be God's instrument to help peace officers who may be dealing with moral injury and guide them to a place of inner peace.
We've come to the end of the live stream portion of the Adventist Chaplains World Congress. We pray that you've gained tools that you can use in your daily chaplaincy ministry experience. Don't forget to fill out the CEU form to record the programming that you watched today. The link for the form is on the World Congress website page. The training for community, corrections, and military chaplaincy will be available beginning at the dates you see on the screen. You'll be able to watch them on the ACM YouTube channel or our Adventist Chaplaincy Ministries channel at vimeo.com.